Abibi Fahodie. This is the African Liberation Media Podcast, and today I'll be your host, Brother Amos, here with my esteemed elder, Baba Makaru. And we're in the month of August, of what we like to call Black August. And we touched a little bit on Black August on our last program last week, but today we're going to go into some specific important events in dealing with Black August. We're coming up on the Earth Day of our great ancestor, esteemed ancestor, the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey. And we're going to get into a discussion about Brother Garvey in a moment. And we're also going to deal with the Haitian Revolution and some other various events that took place in the month of August that makes this month so special in regards to African people around the globe. So, Baba Makaru, um, in your research, in studying one of our greatest leaders, who I would call the greatest leader that black people had in the 20th century, the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey. Share some of your thoughts and insight on the importance of Garvey's movement, how it applies to us today, and what we need to do as black people, African people, to take what he left us and continue that legacy.
Abibi Fahodie, African family, Brother Amos, our esteemed brother in the struggle, Gullah Jack, is away from us today. He has some important business to attend to, and we'll try to carry on in his stead. We certainly miss his voice and his insight. Yes, indeed, it is. It is. We're right in the middle of Black August, and if we were living 100 years ago, and we had consciousness, or we were inspired by the thoughts, the philosophies, and opinions of the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, we would, if we could afford to, and we certainly would put forth every effort to be in New York, because Garvey's first international Congress of African people started on August the 1st, 1920, and it ran for the entire month. The highlight was a massive program held in Madison Square Garden where 25,000 black people, if you can think about this, 25,000 black people attended this conference, this one particular gathering during the conference in Madison Square Garden in 1920. We're not talking about 25,000 people attending a concert to see some entertainer or attending a sporting event. 25,000 black people came to hear this brother speak, and along with the other officials of the organization. And of course, they announced during that Congress the formation of what we call the Abibi Fahodie flag. It's also known as the UNIA, the Universal Negro Improvement Association flag. Some people call it the Pan-African flag. That was introduced on August the 13th, and they also introduced the Universal Declaration of Human Rights for black people, for African people, on that date. So we're taping this on August the 16th, and the program will be published on August the 17th, which is, as Brother Amos said, Brother Garvey's Earth Day. Marcus Garvey, like all of our organizations, dynamic individuals, and nations, since the fall of the Songhai Empire in the 16th century, was taken out of his development. His primary enemies, make no mistake about it, were the United States government and the colonial powers, Great Britain and France. And they were assisted at various times by some race traitors. But just to give people a historical perspective, I'm going to go through some of the key events in a timeline of Honorable Garvey's life. Of course, he was born August 17, 1887, as Marcus Mosiah Garvey Jr., St. Ann's Bay, Jamaica, to Marcus Mosiah Garvey Sr., who was a mason, a stonemason, and a brick mason, and Sarah Jane Richards, a domestic worker and a farmer. And so he started actually at the age of 3. His godfather had a printing business, and he actually started at the age of 3, if you can imagine that, hanging around the printing business. And of course, he would go on to become a master printer. He enrolled in education. He said that as a child he knew no difference between black and white. As a child, he played with white children, black children, little white girls, little white boys. And then as they got older, the parents found it necessary to separate them, and he began to understand. He moved to Kingston Kingston, Jamaica in 1906, where he was employed in a printing shop. And his mother passed away at the age of 56 in 1908. In 1909, at a very young age, he began, his publishing business. This is very interesting. He was so young, and started publishing. And between 1910 and 1912, Garvey traveled to Central America countries, Costa Rica, Panama. He edited a newspaper, and he returned to Jamaica in 1912. In 1912, he moved to London, where he attended Birkbeck College. Let's see. In 1913, he visited France and Spain and some other European countries. And of course, this was during the time when the European powers were beginning World War I. And there were some very interesting things. I go back and read some things about his, what he was thinking during that time. But I just want to go on through, the timeline. In 1914, on July the 8th, he returned to Jamaica, and that's where he met Amy Ashwood. And on July the 20th, 1914, Marcus Mosiah Garvey and Sister Amy Ashwood co-founded the Universal Negro Improvement Association and the African Communities League. He began to publish once again. He published a pamphlet where he was focusing on, he said, a talk with Afro-West Indians, the Negro race and its problem. Of course, on August 4th, Great Britain declared war on Germany. September the 8th, he wrote Booker T. Washington, who had founded the Tuskegee Institute, now Tuskegee University, in 1881, and asked him for his support. Amazingly, Washington, who was probably being bombarded with letters, because at this time, Washington was clearly regarded as the preeminent black leader in the United States, but he actually responded to Garvey and invited him to come to Tuskegee. But Washington and Garvey made plans to travel to the United States, but Washington actually died on November the 14th, 1915. I read a report that said the cause of Washington's death was extremely high blood pressure. I think, if I remember the report correctly, his blood pressure was something like either 240 or 220 over 180 or something like that, just extremely high. And I don't know why, or it wasn't being treated or whatever. Certainly they had black doctors there at Tuskegee. Of course, the great George Washington Carver, though not a medical doctor, was an extreme scientist, was working there. So we don't know what happened, but I just mention this because my experience working, I have seen a lot of people of African descent wind up on dialysis, their kidneys destroyed. And initially I thought all these people's kidneys were being destroyed because of diabetes. But what I found out was that most of those people who were on dialysis actually had high blood pressure, which had killed their kidneys because it releases high levels of creatinine. So I mean, that's just something for our people, to take very, very seriously. So 1916, Garvey left Jamaica, and he arrived in the United States in March of 1916. On April 25th, he visited W.E.B. Du Bois, who was the editor of the Crisis and one of the leaders of the NAACP. Very interesting that they reached out, and there was no animosity or anything at this time. He gave his first lecture in the United States at St. Mark's Church Hall in New York, and during the course of the lecture, somehow Garvey took a misstep and fell off the stage. So his first public appearance was an actual total disaster. The United States entered World War I in 1917. Garvey began between May and June. He traveled across 38 states on speaking tours. Now, this is 1917. This man traveled across 38 states in the United States. The United States only had 48 states at that time, right? This is before Alaska and Hawaii. And so the point here is that how widely Garvey traveled. I mean, so he sounds almost like a J.A. Rogers or Runoko Rashidi. I mean, the way he traveled extensively. And of course, this was, obviously he was learning so much, because see, it's one thing to travel, but it's another thing that when you travel, you see things with a consciousness. I know some people who've been to Africa many times and they don't come back having seen a lot of things that are very important because the consciousness is not there.
Mm-hmm.
There was a massive white supremacist violence against black people on July the 2nd in East St. Louis, Illinois, and Garvey spoke out against this, the conspiracy of the East St. Louis riots. He spoke out against that in Harlem. On November the 7th, the Russian Revolution started under Lenin, which is considered one of the most significant moments in history. Let's see. Let me go on here. This to me is very important. When we start talking about the forces aligned against Garvey, we have to always keep our focus on our historical enemies. So in 1918, on June the 3rd, the organization that was the predecessor of the FBI, I think it might have been called the Bureau of Investigation, something like that. It said that they learned via a written report that Garvey speaks nightly at outdoor meetings on a Harlem street corner. So here you have surveillance taking place. And, we've spoken previously about, the surveillance of the family of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., how his grandfather and his father, I mean, it just goes to show, the lesson here, and it's not anything that cause us to be fearful. It's just an awareness. It's just an awareness that these people leave nothing to chance. I told people, when the attacks occurred on September 1st, or September 11th, 9/11, 2001. If 20 of us, and I'm talking about, from my days in the Black Liberation Movement, at the height of the Black Liberation Movement, if 20 of us had tried to go somewhere and learn to fly some passenger jets, we would have been pulled out the class. We never would have gotten off the ground. They would have been suspicious of us from the beginning. And I just point this out because we talk about 1918, and he's already under surveillance. So they started he and Amy Ashwood. Amy Ashwood was there, and so they had already started the chapter of the UNIA in the United States, right? This was in 1917. 13 members joined to form the New York branch. And initially, Garvey didn't plan to be the head of it because his plans was to go back to Jamaica. But as things turned out, he wound up getting elected to the head because the organization was formed, and then it began to split almost immediately among people. And this seems to always be a problem, among us, because everybody wants to be the drum major, as Dr. King would say, and nobody wants to march in the band. They just want to be the drum major. Let's see. The first issue of the Negro World is published in 1918 on August the 17th. Interesting. On his birthday in 1918, first issue of the Negro World. Now, the Negro World becomes important because it becomes the most widely read black newspaper in the entire world, and it became his organ for disseminating information. Du Bois organized his first Pan-African Congress, February 19 through 21st in 1919. And this would really be the beginning of a conflict between Du Bois and Garvey, because Garvey said that Du Bois had blocked his representatives from attending the conference. Du Bois denied that. He said Garvey would have been welcome. And really, when you read Du Bois, the first article Du Bois wrote about Garvey in 1920 in the crisis, there was no animosity. There's some constructive criticism of Garvey's finances, but by and large, he was very praiseworthy of Garvey in 1920. The Negro World was, like I said, was being sold wherever African people were, in the Caribbean, in Europe, in Africa, all across the United States, and particularly in the colonial countries under colonialism. These papers would be confiscated. This is how much fear they had of what was being put in the paper. Now our people seem to have an attitude that reading is not important. But our people during this period of time, and this is one thing that contributes, I would say the major thing that contributes to the growth of the Garvey movement, because all these people couldn't hear him speak. But the major thing, that people would read his newspaper, the Negro World. And so this goes to show you how oriented our people were towards reading. And you got to realize a lot of people who were living during this time had been born during slavery or chattel slavery and were not allowed to read. And, people had to go through extreme risk to learn to read during chattel slavery. And so reading became something that was very important, to our people. And we have lost that. And I think the level of consciousness that we have in our community now, reflects that. On July the 12th, the Bureau of Investigation requests that its New York office forward all information on Garvey to the headquarters in Washington, D.C., and instructs its Chicago division to monitor Garvey and other black radicals. So this was in 1919. Now, 1919, of course, is known as the Red Summer because of the number of attacks on African communities by various elements of the white supremacy dynamic. Extreme violence was taking place during this time. And I think this is also one of the things that contributed to to the growth of the UNIA, because Garvey is coming to the United States articulating his message that, this country means, this country, for as far as African people are concerned, this is always going to be a country where, we are subject to the violence of white supremacy, where we'll never achieve human rights, much less power. And it resonated because of the things that people had seen. Like I said, you have people who had been born during chattel slavery. You have people who had witnessed the promise of Reconstruction, and you have people who had seen the overthrow of Reconstruction. You have people who have seen the massacres of black people in places like Memphis, Tennessee in 1866, and Colfax, Louisiana in 1876, and in Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898, and in various other places, East St. Louis. So people are coming up. Springfield, Missouri. I mean, the massacre of black soldiers in Brownsville, Texas. They were seeing all of these kinds of things. You also had this was a period of time, where black people were being lynched, right? They were being lynched in large numbers, and according to our esteemed ancestor, Sister Ida Wells Barnett, most black people were lynched for economic reasons. Most of these communities were attacked, like Ocoee, Florida, were attacked. Tulsa, Oklahoma, black communities were attacked because of economic development. Same with Wilmington, North Carolina. So Garvey is operating in this period of time, and whereas you had a black boule, black bourgeoisie, or some type of black middle class people who were like, we can't overcome all of this that's taking place, the masses of black people said, I agree with Garvey. I agree with Garvey. And that's why they scraped pennies together. Pennies. They would save nickels and dimes in order to be able to buy, to pay dues to join Garvey's organization, and then to buy stock in his enterprises when they started. Let me just stop on the timeline right there, brother Amos. We're up to 1919, and give you a chance to comment on some of those things, or some things that you've thought about Garvey up to this period before I go on with the timeline.
Well, definitely, the last point that you mentioned was something that I wanted to touch on in regards to the atmosphere and the climate of people that were against Garvey during the time when he was operating. One of the first researchers that really identified the membership of these people in an organization called the Boule was Steve Coakley, and he not only identified those members, but he talked about the prominence that they held in business and in media and influence during those times. And they were sort of a buffer class between the black race and the white race.
Mm-hmm.
In many cases, they would do things that would sort of keep black people in line so that the continuation of black people existing in this American construct could continue to go on.
Mm-hmm.
And that is something that they feared that Marcus Garvey was going to uproot. And in many cases, a lot of these members of the Boule came from families that were traditionally children of whose ancestors were children of slave masters.
Mm-hmm.
So in a lot of cases, it started off with an ancestor who may have been mulatto, who post-slavery was given more funds and resources, or even in some cases during slavery, the slave master would provide these funds and resources for their children through the rape of African women.
Right.
And those families over time passed those resources down and stayed close to those not necessarily their white family members, but they stayed close to that line of a Western or European prototype African person existing or Negro existing in America.
Mm-hmm.
And so they used those funds and resources to start businesses, and they became wealthy and prominent individuals in the black community. And then they created a separation between themselves and other black people who they considered to be lesser than them.
Mm-hmm.
So as you continue down the timeline, we'll identify some of those people and eventually how they also contributed. Like you said, we keep the attention on the enemy, but we also have conspirators that also played a hand or played a role in the sabotaging of Marcus Garvey's movement out of the fear that it would uproot the American Negro construct, and that it would prohibit or stop black people from working on improving race issues in this country. That was their
Mm-hmm.
biggest fear, especially when it came to Garvey speaking about creating a United States of Africa, so to speak.
Exactly. And and what has happened, Brother Amos, is as a result of African people, being taken out of our self-determining development. I have to always tell people. I had a chance to uh, speak to the brothers, the Mashari and the warriors, and some of their family members who were present this past Wednesday at the Mayor's Place. We had an outdoor Black August event last Wednesday, and my good brother Reggie Singleton wanted me to come and speak about Garvey and Black August. And I had about an hour to do that, and of course, spread the information. But one of the things I always, particularly when I'm talking to our younger people, is always remind them that African people once walked this planet as free, proud, productive, prosperous, and powerful people. Okay, and it doesn't matter what we are doing, and we have to do things to survive. We have to fight for survival, and of course, no one is going to sit around. We're not going to allow people to just trample over us and abuse us. But but what has but what has to happen? The struggle, if the struggle doesn't result in African people being returned to a position of being free, proud, productive, prosperous, and powerful people, then it's a struggle that will forever be incomplete, and it's a struggle where you will constantly wind up being in cycles between oppression and reforms. And what Garvey sought to do, without saying it in these exact words, but his objective was to return African people to our position of being free, proud, productive, prosperous, and powerful people. And he saw global African unity with a base on the African continent as the solution to this. Now, one of the things is very interesting that I find very interesting. And by the way, the people that I spoke to, particularly the young people, they asked a lot of very relevant questions, which means that they were tuned in. And of course, when we speak, Brother Amos, we are teachers, but no teacher is any good if the teacher isn't also a learner. And so I always notice when you speak, you encourage audience participation. You want people to engage with you. You want people to ask questions. You want to be challenged. And I'm the same way. Even though you and I, we may not necessarily know all the answers to questions that people may pose, because conscious people, they have ways of coming up with things that you may not know the answer to, but it encourages us, and it challenges us to do even more research to become even better. And so, I just wanted to just shout out to to the brothers, that particularly the young people, Talik and the others who were like, King Jasper and others who were engaged and asking questions
Mm-hmm.
and explaining what a BB Fahodier meant. I mean, this is, man, they just do great work there. Uh, but what I wanted to say is that what was very interesting about uh, one of the Du Bois's proposals at the 1919 uh, Pan African Congress, which took place in Paris, was that Germany had lost the war, so it obviously no longer had control of its colonies in Africa. So Du Bois wanted to have the former German colonies, Namibia, Tanganyika, Cameroon. There was one other, uh, and those colonies, plus Portugal being a weak sister in Europe, the Portuguese colonies, and take the Congo from the Belgians and form that block of nations, into a confederacy, that would be, under, African people, with international support. Now, obviously, the British and the French, in particular, because the British and the French and the European Americans are the greatest enemies of African people. Let's be crystal clear about this. Obviously, they were not going to go for that. But the reason why I mention that is because you can see Du Bois having like sort of a vision of what Garvey was talking about, which then makes us like scratch our heads and say, why couldn't you see what he was doing when he was doing it, and just let him be without, the attacks that would come later. But like I said, initially, the initial articles and everything was positive. He even praised, Du Bois wrote an article uh, about the growing West, what he called the West Indian. This would be Africans from the Caribbean who were immigrating to the United States. According to Professor Robert Hill, who's, I think, the foremost scholar on Garvey, most of these Africans actually came from Barbados, not Jamaica, which is amazing. But you had Africans coming from all of these countries, Antigua, Dominica, Trinidad, Jamaica. You had Africans coming from all of these former British colonies. And but one of the things Du Bois said in the article was the positive impact that the Africans from the Caribbean were having on the black working class in particular, because, and then he even said, it was these Afro-Caribbeans who introduced the concept of Africa for the Africans. He didn't mention Garvey's name, but he was praising the idea. But let me go on. Let me see, where was I? Okay, so we got Hoover in July. September, the Black Star Line signs a contract to purchase its first ship, the Yarmouth, later renamed the Frederick Douglass, for $165,000. October the 11th, this is 1919, with the goal of deporting Garvey firmly in mind, J. Edgar Hoover writes a memo suggesting that investigators pursue the idea of prosecuting Garvey for fraud in connection with his Black Star Line activities. Now, the Black Star Line was incorporated in Delaware, even though Garvey lived in New York City. It was incorporated in Delaware, and a lot of people felt like Delaware was just a playground for anybody who wanted to have a corporation. I'm not blaming Garvey for taking advantage of this, but you can see here in 1919, Hoover is already, talking about deporting Garvey, investigating him and deporting him. On August the 14th, Garvey is shot and wounded in an assassination attempt by a Negro by the name of George Tyler. Okay. In 1920, he founded the Negro Factories Corporation. Right. I think stock in the Black Star Line, I believe, was $5, and stock in the Negro Factories Corporation, was $1. I think they made various products. I think the first black baby dolls, for example, August 1st through the 31st, we already talked about this. The Universal Negro Improvement Association holds its first international convention of the Negro peoples of the world, at Madison Square Garden, and schedules a massive parade in Harlem. During this convention, the UNIA adopts and signs the Declaration of Rights for the Negro peoples of the world, adopts a national flag with the colors red, black, and green, and elects officials for its provisional government. Garvey was elected the provisional president of Africa. Okay. 1921, Garvey got a British passport because he was still a British subject. He would eventually apply for U.S. citizenship, which would never be granted. And a lot of people say, well, if Garvey wanted to move to Africa, why would he apply for U.S. citizenship? Well, he was in the United States. He realized that he would probably be subject to the laws of the United States, and I think he felt that if he was a U.S. citizen, he may be more protected. That's doubtful, but anyway, so he traveled back, to Jamaica and to some of the other countries of the Caribbean. And when he wanted to return to the United States, the U.S. refused to give him a visa, and they held him up, in Jamaica, for a period of time. He finally was able to return in July of 1921. Let's see. On January 12th, 1922, Garvey is arrested for fraudulent use of mails and is held on a $2,500 bond pending presentation of his case to a federal jury. In April, the Black Star Line collapsed due to financial failure, but Garvey would reorganize another line. On June 25th, 1922, what some people consider to be a disaster, political disaster in terms of the optics, Garvey met with the Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, Edward Young Clark, in Atlanta. And this supposedly gave the impetus to Chandler Owen and 7 other Negroes to send a letter of complaint against Garvey to Attorney General Harry Daugherty, and the Garvey Must Go campaign, was launched. Okay, so the letter was sent actually in January 1923, but they launched the Garvey Must Go campaign in June of 1922. On May the 18th, his trial began. On June 21st, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison for mail fraud, and his appeal was denied, and he was taken to the Tombs prison in New York. It was also in 1923 that Du Bois launched a vicious attack on Garvey, including an attack on his phenotype. Garvey, of course, responded in kind. And this, to me, is a very tragic moment where, you have the greatest mass leader of African people, in the Western Hemisphere, Marcus Mosiah Garvey, and perhaps his most towering intellect in Du Bois, literally in the gutter, as if they are, Lil Wayne and Snoop Dogg. I mean, just at that level. It's so tragic. And it really shows how white supremacy impacts even our consciousness, that we have to go there, in the process of an ideological disagreement. Let's see. July, this is in 1924, Liberia refuses to grant visas to the Universal Negro Improvement Association. Now, a lot of people blame Du Bois for his activities regarding Liberia. Liberia, of course, was technically independent, but was actually nothing more than a United States colony, which it had been since it was founded by the American Colonization Society. But the pressure on Liberia was coming from Great Britain and France, because they had a tremendous fear that if Garvey established a beachhead in Liberia, that his ideas would spread to the colonies. And France obviously had the most colonies. They had this big block that was called French West Africa. If you ever look at a map of Africa, say in 1920 or 30 or 40 or even 1950, you will see this block that includes, Mali and Burkina Faso and Senegal. You'll see Cote d'Ivoire. You'll see this block that's known as French West Africa, right? And of course, the British, had the Gold Coast and Nigerians, some other colonies, but they were the main people. They were the ones who were contacting the U.S. government saying, "Y'all need to stop this man. We cannot allow him to come to Africa." And of course, the Firestone Rubber Company wanted to continue the exploitation. I think Firestone and Goodyear both had rubber plantations in Liberia. Of course, so these were a lot of the forces that were aligned. So Garvey eventually got out on appeal and continued his work, but he was arrested in 1925. On June the 8th, Malcolm X's father, Earl Little, a follower of Garvey, appeals to President Coolidge for Garvey's release. November the 18th, President Coolidge commutes Garvey's sentence. Garvey is released from the Atlanta Federal Penitentiary and taken to New Orleans for deportation. He delivers his farewell address from the deck of the ship there, and he left the United States on December the 2nd and never returned. In 1935, he relocated to London, probably a bad environmental atmosphere for Garvey to be in from a health perspective. In 1940, he suffered a cerebral hemorrhage. Some people say he had a heart attack. He was paralyzed on his right side, and his speech was affected. On June the 10th, he died in London. But the fact that we are still talking about Garvey 20 years after his greatest achievement, 133 years after his birth, and is a testament to what he meant to African people. So I covered a lot of stuff there, Brother Amos. If you want to go in on some of the things that concern you, things that you think people should be interested in, from this period of time between 1919 and 1940.
Right. So, a few things that you touched on. I want to kind of expand on those points, just to give an understanding of what was happening at the time when those events had taken place.
Mm-hmm.
So, going back to the Garvey Must Go campaign, that, like you said, the letter was sent in 1923, but prior to that, there had been attacks on Garvey by people like A. Philip Randolph,
Mm-hmm.
who ironically was not included in this letter along with W.E.B. Du Bois, but it wasn't because they didn't want to sign the letter. It was really because the Boule thought that it would be a better perception if what seemed like non-biased people only
Mm-hmm.
penned the letter. So
Right.
this is why on the letter you only have the 7 signatures of these prominent quote-unquote Negroes.
Mm-hmm.
And in the letter they even tried to display their prominence as symbolism for the Attorney General, or as motivation for the Attorney General to act in their favor. These Negroes were Harry Pace, Robert Abbott, John Nell, Julia Coleman, William Pickens, Chandler Owen, Robert Bagnall, and George Harris. So not only did they list their names, but they also listed either their businesses or the influence that they had. So at the top here, or at the bottom of the letter here, it says that Harry H. Pace is the president of the Pace Phonograph Corporation. Robert S. Abbott is the editor and publisher of the Chicago Defender. So once again, we're talking about media and influence.
Right.
John E. Nell is the president of Nell and Parker Real Estate. Julia P. Coleman is the president of Hare Vim Chemical Company.
Mm.
William Pickens is the first secretary of the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People. Chandler Owen is the co-editor of The Messenger.
Right.
Now, the other person who was the editor was A. Philip Randolph.
Exactly.
Robert Bagnall is the director of branches of National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and George W. Harris is a member of the Board of Aldermen of New York City and the editor of New York News.
Mm.
So, in the final paragraph of their demands, they had 29 paragraphs or points that they pointed out in this letter against Marcus Garvey.
Right.
In paragraph 29, it says, "We desire the Department of Justice to understand that those who draft this document, as well as the tens of thousands who will endorse it in all parts of the country, are by no means impressed by the widely circulated reports which allege certain colored politicians have been trying to use their influence to get the indictment against Garvey quashed. The signers of this appeal represent no particular political, religious, or nationalistic faction. They have no personal ends or partisan interests to serve, nor are they moved by any personal bias against Marcus Garvey." That's an important sentence because they purposely left off W.E.B. Du Bois and A. Philip Randolph for that purpose. They sound this tocsin only because they foresee the gathering storm of race prejudice and sense the imminent menace of this insidious movement, which is cancer-like, is gnawing at the very vitals of peace and safety, of civic harmony and interracial concord. So that shows you that, as we know, these people were never for black people gaining power outside of the white power structure.
Mm-hmm.
They were fundamentally for integration. But in some of the other points here, it talks about some of the things that you mentioned, like Garvey's meeting with the Klan member. I think his name was Edward Clark of
Mm-hmm.
the Klan. So Garvey, as he tried to gain power in the South, he went down to Atlanta and he met with Edward Clark of the KKK. And he had that meeting because he saw how much power the Klan had in the South, and he knew how difficult it would be to expand the UNIA in the South. So he came to an agreement with the Klan member of Atlanta to sell off stocks in some of his businesses. And in that agreement, the Klan member, his requirement, I guess you could say, of Garvey, or his ask of Garvey, was to help to weaken integrationist black organizations like the NAACP, because the Klan was not for race mixing, and essentially they were for, along with the neo-Nazis under George Lincoln Rockwell, they were for separation. For many of those who don't know, George Lincoln Rockwell met with the Nation of Islam and
Mm-hmm.
was even invited to speak on their platform. So what you're seeing with these meetings is, once you have been in this for a while, you start to understand who are the primary orchestrators of a lot of the racial tension between African people and Europeans. Now we know that the Klan has a physical hand in that racial tension. They've killed a lot of black people. They've caused a lot of destruction in the black community, and a lot of it has been used to create fear among black people. But when we talk about the mental capacity to craft, orchestrate, and maintain a power structure over a group of people, we often leave out what people would call small hats as being responsible or playing a role in that happening. So Marcus Garvey, he had an agenda that he was using, or that he was trying to achieve in strengthening his own organization. It wasn't that he was aligning with the Klan or integrating with the Klan. It's that he was really trying to exploit a situation where he can gain power. And when this happened, like you stated, this is really what sparked and outrage amongst Negroes like A. Philip Randolph, W.E.B. Du Bois, and others to use this as a quote unquote catalyst to point to Garvey uh, as a tool of white supremacy. And not only did they do that, but they also, in this letter to the Attorney General, they attacked the membership numbers of Marcus Garvey. They tried to say that Garvey only had 20,000 members. Now it's been stated by some people that Marcus Garvey had over 1 million members worldwide, including the diaspora. But in the letter, they quoted W.E.B. Du Bois as being a statistician and saying that he had done the research which showed that Garvey only had 20,000 members. And they also quoted W.A. Domingo, who was also from Jamaica, as saying that Garvey did not have as many members as he was stating. So with that event that took place between Garvey and the Klan member, then these Negroes went on a rampage and really started to push the Garvey Must Go campaign. And it even came to a point, at one point, A. Philip Randolph received a package in the mail with the severed hand of a white man that was signed and supposed to be from the KKK, but of course he attributed it to the UNIA and Marcus Garvey. I guess as a some type of threat to try to scare him. But as this took place, as you stated, Garvey did want to send delegates to Liberia because he wanted to set that up as a nation state for Africans from the diaspora to go to. And what happened during that time is that at this time, like you talked about, Liberia being a colony of the United States, they were in debt to the World Bank. And Marcus Garvey offered to give them $1 million towards their debt to the World Bank in exchange for a partnership. And of course, that would include blacks receiving land, okay, and then having some type of influence in the country. So Garvey sent his delegates there. They were blocked by Liberia from entering because the Liberian president had been convinced, or the Liberian government had been convinced by people like W.E.B. Du Bois that Marcus Garvey was going to try to come into the country and become a dictator. And W.E. Du Bois was financed by the U.S. government and sent there on this mission to meet with the Liberian government strictly to sabotage the plans of Marcus Garvey. And once the Marcus Garvey deal with the $1 million fell through because of them banning the UNIA delegates, then Firestone came in and they gave the government $5 million for the land, and then they used that land, like you stated, to expand their tire company for rubber. So it's not a secret that the mindset that existed in those times, we look at a lot of the things that go on now, and a lot of it is it's the same thing, just in a different format. Back then they didn't have YouTube, they didn't have social media, so we see a lot of attacks on these different platforms from black people at each other. And then we sometimes say that these brothers would not have been doing this in those times. They did it just in a different format, under a different platform, under a different structure. And I'm not saying that it should not have been done. Like you said, I think that often cases when that happens, it just plays into the hands of the white power structure, because then it causes a division, and then it causes a weakening of what could have been a very successful movement. Another thing I want to point out is that in many cases, the Boule oftentimes look down upon Marcus Garvey's followers. They often called them ignorant, low class, voteless Negroes. And they made that point also in a letter to the Attorney General to try to sell themselves as law abiding citizens who are contributing to the betterment of America, and the followers of Marcus Garvey as these low class Negroes who need to be disbanded because they can only cause trouble and negativity. So it's very important to note that separation of class amongst black people, because as I stated earlier, these people still operate under that same guise. They still operate under that same structure. And oftentimes they know that white people look at black people as a problem through all of the stereotypes and many of the attitudes and actions that they created on the slave plantation. Mm-hmm. Like you mentioned before, on previous programs, we talked about Tupac Shakur. You talked about his acronym Thug Life, the hate you give, little infants F's everybody. Mm-hmm. Well, these Europeans created the N-word on the slave plantation.
Right.
All of the bad attributes that can be attributed to black people are foundationally stemming from that experience in the Ma'afa. Mm-hmm. They created the slave.
Right.
And now they have a problem with the slaves and the slave mind that still exists. So they often wanted to point that out to separate themselves and basically, make whites feel comfortable that you have an alliance with us, the good black people, and this is what we need to do to make sure that we keep the quote unquote negative, voteless, ignorant black people in line with our plans for improving America for all people.
Right. I think the thing with the Klan, and I just think that gave Chandler Owen, and like you said, Chandler Owen was the co-editor or co-owner, co-founder, whatever, of the Messenger, along with Randolph, A. Philip Randolph. I think the meeting gave them just ammunition to do what they wanted to do anyway. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I mean, if you consider someone to be an enemy, and that person does something that a mass of people who are following him is going to raise questions about.
It's a perfect propaganda. It would be similar now to if one of our leaders that we looked upon and respected met with Donald Trump. To the masses of people, because of the way they look at Donald Trump, most people will use that right off the bat as a way to say, this guy has to go because he's a Trump supporter. But a lot of our people don't look deeper into what may have been taking place at that meeting.
Yeah, exactly. And so what happens in a situation like that is that there is, I mean, the group of people were a small group of people, right? The opponents, compared to the numbers of people, that Garvey said were in his organization. And based on the amount of money, he was 25,000 people at one rally, tens of thousands of people. I think they were saying that the parade, the Garvey parade in Harlem, I mean, there were tens of thousands of people to come out for the parade. Owen and those had no such following. But if we look at the historical context, we had the rebirth of the Klan in 1915 in Stone Mountain, Georgia, and this was supposedly inspired by the movie, The Birth of a Nation, and so you had that in 1915, and then you had all of these incidents of racial violence uh, taking place in northern cities.
Mm-hmm.
So the optics were
Mm-hmm.
very bad. Uh, Malcolm X was sent by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to meet with the Klan in Atlanta. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
so uh, sometimes people make calculations and they think that this is going to enhance their program, but they have to weigh the optics.
Mm-hmm.
How is this going to look to people? I mean, you're talking about people. People have just come out of the red summer of 1919.
Mm-hmm.
How's this going to look,
Mm-hmm.
to people? And so you have to weigh, what do you think is going to be most advantageous? I mean, so
Especially with black people, because oftentimes we're too symbolic when it comes to optics and emotions and things that we perceive as being good for us or feeling good.
exactly, exactly. And then the other thing, I mean, that to uh, for Du Bois to be, allow himself to be a minister plenipotentiary and envoy extraordinaire, uh, to Liberia, that certainly, gives people the impression that he was going to thwart any efforts by Garvey. But we have to understand the main pressure that was being put on Liberia was being put on Liberia by Great Britain and France. We have to be crystal clear about that. Black people become pawns in these schemes, and
That's how it's
there's
been. I mean, historically, it's the whites have the plan,
mhm,
and and the Negroes assist in carrying the plan out,
exactly.
like your Crispus Attucks, like uh how Hannibal got defeated by the Romans. I mean, you always
Exactly.
have a sector of Negro conspirators that sabotage the movement,
Hmm.
like Denmark Vesey and Gullah Jack.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, George Wilson, right? William O'Neill.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, so the list goes on, and then of course then you have you know people who do even greater damage, like Joseph Mobutu.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, we have this, um, but I know we're running short on time, and I guess we can talk about Haiti, next week, or maybe even during the week if Jack is available. Um, One of the things that I found interesting, I've been listening to a lot of lectures by uh, by Robert Hill, Professor Robert Hill, formerly of UCLA, who I think is the foremost scholar on Garvey. And Garvey wrote this letter uh, called "The Negro's Greatest Enemy," and in this he calls out a lot of the people you mentioned, and others. Uh, it's very well worth reading. Uh, I wouldn't call these Negroes, you know black people's greatest enemy, but they certainly have done a lot of damage. But one of the things, and I just perhaps we can just close with this if I can find this part where he's talking about this, because according to Robert Hill, a lot of people have kind of confused this. Um, so this is what Garvey is saying in this. He's talking about his history. He said, I went traveling through South and Central America, and I set sail for Europe to find out, if it was anything different there, and I found the same thing. You are black. So this is, I'm quoting Garvey directly now. I read of the conditions in America. I read Up from Slavery by Booker T. Washington, and then my doom, if I may call it, of being a race leader dawned upon me in London after I had traveled throughout almost half of Europe. I asked, where is the black man's government? Where is his king and his kingdom? Where is his president, his country, his ambassador, his army, his navy, his men of big affairs? I could not find them. So then I decided I would help make them.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some Garvey scholars, including Tony Martin and Robert Hill, said they totally misread this statement, believe that Garvey drew his inspiration from Washington to reach this conclusion about where's the black man's government. And Hill says that you couldn't possibly get that from reading Up from Slavery.
Mm-hmm.
And so Robert Hill says that when you read Harriet Beecher Stowe's Uncle Tom's Cabin, a part of the book discusses the possibility of Africans being able to build Africa into an empire. That's amazing that Harriet Beecher Stowe in 1852 was talking about this. Now, where she got the information from, I don't know. You know, David Walker mentioned, you know, how Africans re-engineered the Nile in 1829. How did David Walker know that? I mean, these people were obviously reading, you know, the ruins of empires and other things. But anyway, you know, this is, I think, the profound, a very profound statement, these series of questions that whatever the inspiration was, whether it came from reading Uncle Tom's Cabin or reading Booker T. Washington, or reading a number of the other things, because Garvey knew about the empire, the Nile Valley civilizations, for example.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, the amount of knowledge that our people had because they were readers
Mm-hmm.
is just incredible. You could say much more advanced than what these people have now with the internet at their fingertips.
They say Hubert Harrison used to read a book every day.
A book, gosh, I didn't bring my notes in here. When Garvey, you know, had to quit school, he went to work, but he carried a pocket dictionary. And while he was on break at work, he would read, he would try to learn, I think Robert Hill said 25 to 50 words a day. And I wonder if this is where Malcolm X got the idea from, with his parents being Garveyites, if they knew this story about Garvey going through this dictionary and eventually building a vocabulary of 15,000 words.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. But one of the things that Robert Hill said, and he was talking about imagery, and that's where we're talking about optics. And he said that Garvey, more so than someone operating in the political or economic sphere, and this is what Amos Wilson says, in his book, when he's talking about, Garvey and Garveyism, in the New World Order. And he calls Garvey the ultimate psychotherapist. But Robert Hill says that Garvey's focus was on the mind. His real thought was on education, the pedagogy.
Mm-hmm.
And he calls him a pedagogue, as a matter of fact. And he said this is he said, when you look at the three images of Garvey, and he put them up on this slide, you see Garvey in a cap and gown. Why do you see Garvey in a cap and gown? Garvey was literally a teacher or a professor of the highest level. Okay? And so he had numerous pictures of himself taken in a cap and gown, right? Because he wanted to emphasize the significance of self-education, right? Of wanting, when he traveled back from England, he could come to Canada. He couldn't come to the United States. He started a school in Canada. He wanted us to expand our consciousness, to have knowledge of self. The other picture that we see of Garvey is in a military uniform. And a lot of people made fun of this. But what is Garvey saying here?
Mm-hmm.
Where is his army, his navy,
Mm-hmm.
his men of big affairs? He knows that, look, no matter what you accomplish, if you can't protect it,
Mm-hmm.
you'll never be able to develop it. Kwame Ture always seize, hold, develop. Hold, that involves military science, okay,
Mm-hmm.
in some form or another. And then the other image that he projected, even though Garvey didn't, I haven't not seen any pictures of Garvey in African clothes, but he was always dressed to look like a business person, and that was he wanted to project that image, even though in wearing European suits, he wanted to project that image, that we have to think positively. We have to have, positive self-images. We have to look at ourselves as upright people.
Mm-hmm.
And, I'm sure he would have gotten to the, to more, African attire. But I'm just saying, these three images. And so this, I think, is reflected in this statement,
Mm-hmm.
The images that he wanted to project. But Dr. Robert Hill said the most important image, because the way he placed Garvey with the cap and gown in the center, and then the other two images on the sides, he says, if you don't have knowledge of self, if we don't control our thinking, if we don't control our education, then all these other things, the politics and economics, won't matter. And that's what I think has been proven true.
Mm-hmm.
History has absolved Garvey, in that capacity, and the Chandler Owens and people of the world, W.A. Domingo, his former colleague, became one of his most, severe critics. Have been proven wrong,
Mm-hmm.
and Garvey was proven correct. So
Mm-hmm.
I know we about out of time, brother. So I think we dropped a lot of knowledge about Garvey on our audience today.
We did, Ashe. And to your point, one of Garvey's most famous quotes was that the intelligent run the world and the ignorant carry the burden.
A BB for Hodier, brother.
A BB for Hodier. Like, comment, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and check us out on Spotify and also on Apple Podcasts.
Ashe.
Power or the lack of power. I want to repeat this. Power or the lack of power. If your education in this institution